because I want to talk about, of course, we're talking about the mystery of the Godhead revealed. And I want to talk about the name of God and even the name of Jesus. I felt like some of that information has been misunderstood for a while. I actually remember on a Wednesday night, Brother Jared encountering a oneness, I think maybe a oneness apostolic or a oneness Pentecostal man here in the pew. And he had some contention about the name of God maybe being changed, maybe the J being added to it. I wasn't exactly sure if he was dealing with the J to Jesus or the J to Jehovah. So I guess we'll talk about both of them just real briefly because we're talking about the Godhead, so we might as well talk about his name. So the name of God in the Hebrew text is Yahweh. That's the four-letter Hebrew words, Y-H-W-H. When you go into Exodus chapter 3, when Moses is at the burning bush, this is when you see God's name in the text, Yahweh. And there's been some debate on how to pronounce the name of God, but Yahweh is the leading pronunciation for it. And sometimes when you go into a modern translation, even like the King James, when you go into any of the texts, you'll see, instead of Yahweh, you'll see Lord in lowercase font in most of your texts. And that wasn't some conspiracy to really conceal the name of God. It was really a taboo that the Jews picked up about 200 years before Jesus came up on the scene. So it was this tradition that the Jews created when the scribe would read the divine name of God, Yahweh, when Yahweh would come up in the text, especially when the scribe would be reading it out loud. They would not pronounce Yahweh. Instead, they would substitute it for the Hebrew word Adonai, which meant Lord. And then when we get to the translation from the Hebrew into the Greek translation, the name of God is actually completely swapped around with Kulios, which meant my Lord, like Adonai did. So Adonai really substituted the name of God. And then you get into Latin, it's Dominus, which meant my Lord. And that's finally actually where we get it. That's where Lord came from in our text, was this substitution from Adonai or Elohim, mostly Adonai. So, and then there's just, there was this time to where they were trying to figure out what God's name was. So there's this reconstruction of the name of God. And that's actually where Jehovah came from where the J was added. Because I think the W's were replaced by V's in the Hebrew language. I think the I's and the Y's of Greek were replaced by J's. And then, so when I think it was between the 6th and the 10th century, I think it was the Masoretics were the scribes that put the vowel pointing into the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language didn't always have vowel pointing in the Hebrew language. So the word Adonai, what they did, and the reason why we actually have Jehovah is because when the scribes put the vowels of Adonai into the consonants of Yahweh, it produced what's called a nonsense word. It'd be something like Yahweh, and which eventually led to Jehovah when the J replaced the Y. So that's kind of where we got the name of God, going from Yehovah or Jehovah to Jehovah. But Yahweh, saints of God, literally, Yahweh, the Y-H-W-H in the Hebrew text is Yahweh. That is the divine name of God. It's not Jehovah. Jehovah is, again, the Adonai consonants pointing into, or the Adonai vowels into the consonants of Yahweh, producing a nonsense word. So when you say Jehovah, you're saying the careful way to say God's name. Or like saying Elohim, which is a name for God in Hebrew. Or I think Arabic is Allah for God. I mean, that's literally what God means in Arabic is Allah. So you're saying the careful way of saying God's name, because the Jews thought it was blasphemy to say God's divine name when reading it out loud. So that's where you see the substitution for Lord in our text in lowercase font.